Eraserhead. It's time to talk about Eraserhead from one of the greatest directors of all time who is still living, David Lynch.
Pick a number. Today's number is 1.
By and large, a lot of people consider Eraserhead one of his best movies, if not his best movie. So of course I needed to check out Eraserhead, and I finally did, thanks to Weekly Classic Movie Night. Now, before we continue, Weekly Classic Movie Night is going to be postponed a week because I'll be in Yellowstone, so I'm going to miss next week, unfortunately, RIP. And now Eraserhead. I think this is borderline a flawless movie. Now, it is low budget, so there are things I am forgiving, like some effects that are a little bit wonky, and some acting that's a little bit wonky, and some sets that show the seams a little bit, but that's low budget filmmaking, and the craft here completely makes up for it. And some of the effects are genuinely great, like that baby dude, when they cut it open, or not cut it open, but cut open its bandages, and it just like falls apart. That's disgusting. This is a movie about a man who is scared of growing up. And that is the gist of this movie. Of course, there's a lot more to unpack, but that is the general consensus that I gleaned from the film. There's many theories, there's many fan explanations of this movie, and that's essentially what I'm going to attempt to do today. But the general consensus around this movie is that it is a movie about the fear of fatherhood. And while that's an element of this, I think that is grossly misrepresenting the fullness of what this movie is delivering to us. There's so much more it's talking about. There's so much more to be gathered than just a man being afraid of being a father. Of course, that's an element of it because this baby is horrifying, and who wouldn't be scared of having this baby? And there's elements of him being afraid of leaving the room because the child keeps crying, him seeing the child as this monstrous little disgusting baby because he had it with a woman he didn't love, who didn't love him, and so he doesn't really love the child, so he sees it as a monster. And so there's elements of being afraid of being a father because you're scared that maybe you're gonna have the baby with the wrong person, maybe the baby is not going to look cute and lovely and awesome to you because you're not in love with your partner, you're not in love with it, you just don't love the child. So there's elements of that, to be sure. But the biggest element for me is a fear of growing up and being pushed into being grown up. Because there is a great couple sequences where the child, who is this horrible, disgusting monster, becomes Henry for 2 scenes that I can recall. One, and then there's another moment when he sees a woman who he kind of lusts after, who lives across the hall from him, with another man after he had sex with her. And he is staring at her in befuddlement and bewilderment, and it cuts to her point of view for just a moment, and he becomes the child, mouth agape, looking at her as if this is the craziest thing he's ever seen. It's like he's seeing her as cheating on him, and he's bewildered by it, even though he cheated on his wife with her. And he becomes a child in that moment, not mature, not understanding reality, not understanding life. So the thematics of growing up are an essential part of this movie. It begins with a sex scene, sort of, when he is half transparent floating in front of a meatball, which I think is just a representation of an egg being impregnated by him. And he realizes or finds out from the woman's family that she got pregnant and had a deformed baby. And that's another kind of anxiety about the fear of fatherhood, having a fear that your child's going to be deformed or have some kind of horrible deficiency when it's born. That's a genuine fear that a lot of people, including myself, have. What if this child comes out deformed? What if this child isn't right? And that's a fear that a lot of people have, and that's a fear perfectly executed in this movie. But he goes to his girlfriend's parents' house, and it's incredibly weird. And there's another element of the anxiety of meeting parents, anxiety of meeting your significant other's family, and they're weird and they're different and they're not like you at all. One of them, the dad, he has just problems with his knee. He says his arm is always numb. He's constantly smiling. His mom tries to like make out with him. The grandma can't even move without the mom stirring the salad for her. They have tiny little chickens, and there's that fear of that part of life. There's a lot of anxiety about life in this movie. It's not just about the fear of fatherhood.
Do you mind just cut them up like regular chickens?
Sure, just cut them up like regular chickens.
It's about fear of living, and that is so much more poignant to me. There's so much anxiety in this movie about just living, about moving around in the universe, meeting your significant other parents, having a child with someone you don't love, seeing a prostitute that lives across the hall from you and being naive to the fact that she's a prostitute until the moment you see it. There's so much here about naivety. There's so much here about anxiety. There's so much here about everything. It's just so well executed and filled, dense with things to talk about. It's a movie with barely any dialogue. The shooting script for this was 20 pages, which is the length of what a short film should be. To give you some context, a 2.5-hour movie should roughly be 180 pages. One page of a script is roughly 1 minute of screen time. So of course, this movie that's 20 pages of script is going to be mostly wordless and driven by visuals and audio alone. And that is really what sells this movie. Now, there's a ton to talk about thematically, but what really makes this work is the audio-visual part of it. There's this constant droning ambient sound that is incredibly unnerving through the entire thing, whether it's a machine whirring constantly in the background, the child crying, this loud, uncomfortable static sound. It's just this constant reverberation of noise that makes you feel uneasy just watching it. And it puts you into the headspace of this character who's uneasy just being alive. The only time that constant droning seems to stop is when he is watching the radiator. And that seems to be kind of a representation of his thoughts. It's a place where he just goes to be away from the world. But that sound is what kind of drives the whole film. And the visuals that David Lynch presents in black and white are really stunning. There's some quality lighting in this. There's some quality cinematography in this. There's a great shot when all the lights of the stage and the radiator are lighting up, and it kind of pans up to show these feet, and it's kind of this weird visual. But there's also great scenes of humor too, visual humor, which I love when you can tell a joke without telling a joke. David Lynch just killed this movie. He actually absolutely hit a home run grand slam. I loved it. I think it's fantastic. It's so visual. It's so interesting. There's so much to sit on. You could watch this 15 times and pull one new kernel out of it every single time, or see one detail you didn't see before, or think about the branches that are just stuck in mud on his nightstand and decide what that means. There's so much more to think about. There's a picture of the atomic bomb on his wall. Is David Lynch just obsessed with atomic bombs? And that's what I love about David Lynch's work, is that it feels like it's grounded in something of a reality while also showing some of the craziest, weirdest, kind of disturbing visuals. I loved it, man. Check it out, bro. Check it out, duh. I forgot to mention it, but next week's, or not next week's because of Yellowstone, but in 2 weeks, we will be watching The Grave of the Fireflies. So prepare yourself. You got plenty of time to watch it. Let's kick this into high gear and watch Grave of the Fireflies.